Welcome back to English Through Wisdom. I hope you learned something valuable from our last lesson. It is wonderful to have you here again today.
He was the most feared swordsman in the province, a man who had never once lost a duel. And still, every single night, he lay awake fighting a war no one else could see. His hands, steady enough to end a man's life in a single motion, trembled in the dark. Years later, he would understand that the deadliest opponent he ever faced never carried a blade at all. Welcome to English Through Wisdom. Here, we learn English through powerful stories and timeless lessons from cultures around the world. Today's story comes from feudal Japan, and it will change how you think about strength itself. The mountain pass above Kaga province was silent that morning, the kind of silence that felt earned rather than empty, and Tetsuro moved through it the way he moved through everything, precisely, watchfully, alone. He was 53 years old, and the peace of the Edo period had done nothing to soften him. If anything, peace had made him restless in a way that war never had. War, at least, gave his rage somewhere to go. By any measure that mattered in his world, Tetsuro had won. Lords invited him to their tables. Young swordsmen bowed when he passed. Children in his home village were told his name the way other children were told the names of gods. He had survived 11 campaigns and killed more men than he allowed himself to count, and not one of them had ever managed to leave a mark on his skin. They had left other marks instead. At night, in the small wooden house he kept at the edge of town, Tetsuro would close his eyes and find himself back on a riverbank outside Sekigahara, watching a boy no older than 16 fall to his knees, with Tetsuro's blade still in him. He would hear again the particular sound a man makes when he understands he is about to die. He would smell smoke that had stopped burning decades ago. He told no one this. A samurai who could not sleep was, in his mind, a contradiction that should not exist, so he simply did not exist as a man who could not sleep. He trained harder, he drank less, he spoke less. And still the nights came for him, one after another, patient as debt collectors. It was on the road to Kanazawa, 3 days into a journey he had taken 100 times before, that Tetsuro first noticed the temple. It was barely a temple at all. More like a single room with a curling roof, tucked into a fold of the mountain where the wind seemed to forget to blow. An old monk sat outside it on a flat gray stone, doing, as far as Tetsuro could tell, nothing whatsoever. Tetsuro had planned to walk past. Instead, something made him stop. "You sit alone on a mountain with no walls and no guard," Tetsuro said, more accusation than question. "Who protects you from danger?" The monk, whose name Tetsuro would later learn was Kaito, opened one eye and studied him for a long moment before he smiled. "The same one who protects you," Kaito said, "once you stop fighting yourself." Tetsuro almost laughed. He had faced men with spears at his throat who spoke less strangely than this. He called the answer foolish, turned, and continued down the mountain, certain he would never think of the old man again. He thought of nothing else for 3 days. By the 4th day, curiosity had beaten pride, which had almost never happened to Tetsuro before, and he found himself climbing back up the same narrow path, telling himself he only wanted to understand the riddle so he could dismiss it properly. Kaito did not seem surprised to see him. "I want to understand what you meant," Tetsuro said, standing over the seated monk the way he might stand over an opponent. "Teach me." "I will not teach you anything," Kaito said. "I will only ask you to sit and watch your own mind for as many days as it takes you to see what I already see." Tetsuro expected drills. He expected a wooden sword, a test of balance, something that would let him prove himself the way he had proven himself his entire life. Instead, Kaito pointed to a flat stone beside his own and said nothing further. The first hour of sitting was unbearable in a way no battlefield had ever been. Without an enemy in front of him, Tetsuro discovered that his mind supplied one anyway. Memories arrived uninvited, sharp, and complete, and he found himself gripping his own knees the way he once gripped the hilt of his sword. By the second day, the memories had names. He saw Hachiro, his closest friend from the Sekigahara campaign, who had died shielding Tetsuro from an arrow that should have found Tetsuro's own chest, and whose family Tetsuro had never once visited afterward because he could not bear their gratitude. He saw the farmhouse his company had burned on the way to Osaka, and the woman who had stood in the doorway screaming a name that was not his, but that he had never stopped hearing anyway. He saw, over and over, his own reflection in polished steel, a face he had spent 30 years training into perfect stillness, hiding a mind that had never once been still at all. "I do not understand what I am supposed to find here," Tetsuro finally said on the third evening, his voice rougher than he intended. Kaito did not open his eyes. "You are not supposed to find anything. You are supposed to see what has been fighting inside you the entire time. No enemy you ever faced with a blade caused you as much suffering as the thoughts you carry when no one else is watching." Something in Tetsuro's chest, something he had held closed for decades the way a man holds a wound shut with both hands, finally gave way. He did not weep in front of the monk. He would not allow himself that. But that night, alone in the small guest room of the temple, for the first time since he was a boy, Tetsuro cried until there was nothing left to cry, and in the emptiness that followed, he slept without dreaming for the first time in longer than he could remember. Bushido was never only the way of the sword, the old monk said. Its highest teaching was always mastery of the self. Any man can learn to strike quickly when his blood is hot. Very few learn to remain calm when everything in them wants to burn. That is the harder discipline. That is the true one, true. Tetsuro sat with this for a long time before he spoke again. "Then everything I built my life on was incomplete." "Not wrong," Kaito said gently. "Incomplete. You mastered the enemy outside you. You never learned that the enemy inside required the same discipline, the same patience, the same years of practice. You simply never turned your training toward it." Tetsuro stayed at the temple 11 days in total, though it felt to him like a different kind of lifetime. When he finally walked back down the mountain toward home, he did not feel lighter in the way stories promise. He felt, instead, steadier. The way a tree feels steadier after a storm has tested every one of its roots and found them holding. The true test came 2 weeks later, in the market square of his own town, in front of people who had known him his whole life. A young swordsman named Ren, ambitious and eager to build a reputation the fastest way he knew how, stepped directly into Tetsuro's path and insulted him loudly enough for the entire square to hear, calling him old, calling him finished, calling him a name meant to end in only one response. The old Tetsuro, the one who had spent 30 years believing his worth was measured in wins, would have answered with steel before the boy finished his sentence. This Tetsuro stood still. He looked at Ren for a long moment, and in the boy's furious, frightened eyes, he recognized someone he used to know very well. Himself, 30 years younger, certain that violence was the only proof of strength he would ever be given. Tetsuro bowed once with full respect and turned and walked away. The square went silent in a way that felt, to those watching, almost like disappointment. Whispers followed him down the street. The word coward carried on more than one tongue. Tetsuro did not turn back. It was Ren himself who understood first, weeks later, once his anger had cooled enough to let him think clearly. He realized that the walk-away had taken more control than any duel ever could have. That a man who no longer needed to prove his strength to a crowd had already won a battle Ren did not yet know existed. Tetsuro lived another 22 years after that day in the market square. He fought no more duels. He raised students instead, and the ones who trained under him said the same thing to anyone who asked. He taught the sword like any master, but he taught something else too, something in the way he sat, the way he listened, the way anger seemed to simply pass through him instead of taking root. When he died, an old man surrounded by people who loved him rather than merely feared him, no one in the village spoke first of how many battles he had won. They spoke of the quiet that had surrounded him for over 2 decades, and how, somehow, being near him had made them feel it too. The story you just heard is inspired by the deeper philosophy behind Bushido, the ethical code followed by Japan's samurai class, which developed over centuries and was shaped heavily by Zen Buddhist thought during the Edo period. Most people outside Japan know Bushido only through its surface, the discipline of the sword, the loyalty to a lord, the willingness to face death without flinching. Fewer people know that many of Bushido's most respected teachers considered the sword the smaller half of the practice. The larger, harder half was self-mastery. The ability to remain calm in chaos, to act from principle instead of impulse, and to let go of pride even when pride is the easiest thing in the world to hold on to. There is a concept closely tied to this idea called fudoshin, which roughly translates to immovable mind. It does not mean an absence of emotion. It means a mind that has trained itself so thoroughly that fear, anger, and desire can rise and pass through it without controlling its actions. The same way Tetsuro's memories rose in the temple without destroying him once he learned to simply witness them instead of fighting them. This is why the story places Tetsuro's real transformation not on the battlefield, but in stillness, sitting beside a monk who refuses to fight him at all. The lesson only becomes real once Tetsuro stops treating his own mind as something to conquer and starts treating it as something to understand. That is why this wisdom has survived for centuries, carried forward through swordsmanship schools, Zen monasteries, and eventually into modern psychology, which now describes something remarkably similar under a different name: emotional regulation. The ability to notice a feeling without being ruled by it. The proverb at the heart of this idea is often expressed simply in words attributed to various Bushido teachings across different periods. The greatest victory is the victory over oneself. It is not a comfortable lesson. It asks more of a person than any duel ever could, because there is no opponent to defeat and declare the fight finished. There is only the daily, quiet, unglamorous work of choosing calm over reaction, one moment at a time, for the rest of your life. Most of us will never hold a sword, and most of us will never need to. But almost all of us carry some version of Tetsuro's hidden battlefield, a place inside where old memories, old anger, or old fear keep replaying long after the events themselves are finished. Maybe it is not a war you survived. Maybe it is a relationship that ended badly, or a mistake you have never fully forgiven yourself for, or a version of yourself you built years ago out of fear, one that still shows up whenever you feel threatened, even now, even when the actual danger has long since passed. Here is a question worth sitting with, the same way Tetsuro sat with his. What would change in your life if you stopped treating your own difficult thoughts as enemies to defeat, and started treating them as something to simply notice, the way you would notice weather passing overhead? Have you ever, like Tetsuro, mistaken control for peace, believing that if you could just manage every outcome, every person, every risk, the anxiety underneath would finally stop? Have you ever, like Ren, mistaken restraint in someone else for weakness, only to understand much later how much strength that restraint actually required? And perhaps the hardest question of all, which battle inside yourself has lasted the longest? Not the argument with a stranger or the disagreement at work. Those pass quickly enough. I mean the quieter one, the one that has been running in the background for years, the one you have gotten so used to carrying that you almost forget it is there, until a moment of silence, like the one Tetsuro found on that mountain, forces you to finally notice it. You do not need a temple in the mountains to begin. You only need a few honest minutes with yourself, and the willingness to watch your own mind the way Tetsuro finally learned to, without judgment, without immediately reaching for a weapon. I would genuinely like to know what came up for you while you listened to this story. If you feel comfortable, share it in the comments. Sometimes naming the battle out loud is the first real step toward ending it. Here are 12 useful B2 level words and phrases from today's story, the kind you can use in everyday conversation, not rare academic vocabulary. Restless, meaning unable to relax or stay still, often because of worry or dissatisfaction. Example, after the stressful meeting, she felt restless all evening. To haunt, meaning if a memory or thought haunts you, it keeps returning and disturbing you. Example, that embarrassing mistake still haunts me years later. Uninvited, meaning happening without being asked for or wanted. Example, old memories can appear uninvited, especially late at night. To dismiss, meaning to decide that something is not worth considering. Example, he dismissed the idea as impossible before even trying it. Curiosity, meaning a strong desire to know or learn something. Example, her curiosity about the old house grew every day. Unbearable, meaning too difficult or painful to accept or continue. Example, the silence in the room felt unbearable at first. To grip, meaning to hold something very tightly. Example, he gripped the steering wheel as the storm got worse. Reputation, meaning the general opinion people have about someone. Example, she built her reputation through years of hard work. To provoke, meaning to deliberately cause someone to react, often with anger. Example, he tried to provoke her, but she stayed calm. Restraint, meaning self-control, the act of holding yourself back. Example, it took real restraint not to respond angrily. Steadily, meaning in a calm, gradual, and consistent way. Example, her confidence grew steadily over the following months. To let go of something, meaning to stop holding on to a feeling, idea, or grudge. Example, it took him years to finally let go of the past. Repeat this paragraph aloud after me. Focus on rhythm and natural pronunciation, not on speaking quickly. He was the most feared swordsman in the province, a man who had never once lost a duel. And still, every single night, he lay awake fighting a war no one else could see. His hands, steady enough to end a man's life in a single motion, trembled in the dark. He told no one this. He simply trained harder, spoke less, and let the silence carry what he could not say out loud. Tetsuro spent 30 years mastering an enemy outside himself before he ever turned to face the one within. The fear, the anger, the pride that ruled him quietly for decades. His story and the deeper Bushido teaching behind it remind us that real strength is not the absence of an inner battle. It is choosing, again and again, to meet that battle with calm instead of force. Whatever war you are quietly carrying today, I hope this story gave you one small piece of steadiness. Keep learning English, keep discovering stories, and keep collecting wisdom from around the world.
If you enjoyed learning English through this ancient saying, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need this wisdom today. Until next time, keep learning English and keep collecting wisdom from around the world.